poverty and social unrest in the world. Some people can call it social unrest, some people can call it terrorism, some people can call it just Maoists in every way, right? You map that and you will see it's poverty, lack of energy services, lack of appropriate social enterprises which look at holistically, and the violence is in fact maps very, very nicely, which is sad. So you and me have so much of responsibility to actually, as citizens of the world, we need to break this whole boundaries of countries and negotiate in terms of carbon between India and the US, and we forget who made the boundaries in the first place. It's man-made boundaries. The world is world. I think we need to create social enterprises that are very replicable and looking at the poor as a center, not as poor as beneficiaries and end consumers. Thank you very much for that.
Really great. There was really pin drop silence, and I'm sure everybody was magnetized. Anyway, we have about 10 minutes for question answer. So,
and before that, if the lady from Prosperity Candle, if you're here, could you please come and see me here? From Prosperity Candle, I'd love to see you. Can you come up here? Go ahead.
So we have some time for question answer. I hope you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I think, can we clone him?
That's your profession. Yes.
Well, so just this is only a very fundamental level, but in your experience, so where would you suggest that we start, say, pushing for this paradigm shift you're advocating, say this openness, so just sharing knowledge in that, and also just pushing governments? When you mentioned the boundaries here, it's that there is plenty of inertia at the government level. For example, just take any country. So where would you suggest, so where should, in your experience, start pushing for paradigm shift?
I would start pushing at the youngsters level between 15 and 20, 25, and especially in a lot of the schools. And if the shifts like the IITs, the IIMs, the Sloan School, the Harvard School starts changing, I think, see, what those schools are more dangerous, in a sense, dangerous and opportunistic. Because if you look at, those are the people that government actually listens to. I mean, if you have an Indian coming and studying in Harvard School, he goes back and our finance minister listens to him or her, right? Because he's from Harvard or he's from IIM. I think we need to have a fundamental shift in the schools, the thought process of what business models actually mean for the world. Today, the business models are too skewed towards, it's like, you always hear about failed entrepreneurs. Have you actually heard about failed VCs? You don't hear about failed VCs. And all the VCs have no practical experience on the ground. I think the fundamental shift has to come from the schools who are actually, that's where I would say the bud is, to cut the bud of influence in many ways. And I would actually go and start hammering on those schools to actually make not social entrepreneurship or any of the social as elective course. It has to come to mainstream if we have to look at the business in general. I think that's where, and then from an India level, I would say, and in many of the Asian countries, I would say, is we have to shift from our rote-based education system. We have to bring in that innovativeness of thought process in schools, which we are very good in Xeroxing, right? But we not good in innovating. I think that's where I would go to between 2nd and 6th grade class, change the education system. Those at one level, at the other level. And for that, I think most of the youngsters need to actually push. Just as you would, I see a lot of these youngsters who are protesting either for anti-corruption in India or in the Wall Street. The best form of protest is create solutions. You become more hopeful in life rather than just protesting.
Anyone else? Yeah.
So the profit, Selco is a for-profit company, and the profits you get, how do you reinvest that?
See, we have 3 investors, and for us, we have a mandate that the management actually has a stronger say than the shareholders. That's how the share agreement actually got written. All the profits that we make actually goes back into the organization of further development of what we go through in terms of the processes. So we have 3, the Lemerson Foundation, ENCO, and Good Energies are the 3 investors. So we allocate the profits in a way that, okay, how much is it goes for innovation, how much actually goes for working capital, and then the rest actually goes towards as a rainy day cash flow analysis for us in terms of our project. So we also have, I also want to make it clear that it also depends on how you actually set up the, and coming to the young social entrepreneurs, is that also it depends on, I get very jittery when I see a business plan being written by a single social entrepreneur. They say, oh, I'll hire a CFO once I get the money. No, the CFO has to be the part of the business plan. If you come to some of our meetings that you think that is a hardcore cutthroat company, you have a five to six manage the management, and 2 of them come from the tree hugging side, 2 come from the commercial side, 1 is in somewhere in the between. And that fight for the last 15 healthy fight that we've had for 14 years, in fact, has actually helped keep that balance. And that's where we fight about where do we keep the profits for the next year. Does it go for growth? Does it go for rainy day? Does it go for incentives for the technicians? That's where we start. The first person to incentivize is the technician. And then you go up. And if something is left, then the management gets it.
Arun?
Harish, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. And after I met with you 2 months ago, I actually visited Kumta and talked to some of your salespeople and some of your local managers there. And I saw all the good work on the ground, actually, what they were doing. Now, I know you didn't mention it today about the school girl who could carry the battery to school and get it charged. And only when she goes to school, she can charge the battery and come home and there's light at home. So those kind of programs are fascinating. During that whole discussion, one of the things which troubled me the most was that, as rich people, if you will, the government actually spends a lot of money in building these hydroelectrical power plants, the grid, and delivering power to my doorstep, right? And the government is completely subsidizing this whole chain. But for the poor, the government is not doing anything. And they essentially have to pay a very high premium for that complete power package they're getting at their door. And the government did not have to spend any money on the grid at all for them in maintaining that grid. Is there an opportunity in your financing to go back to the government and say, listen, this portion of that charge is something the government should bear? Because if this person was sitting in the city, the government would have put that much cost in to bringing the power to that door. Is there a way to ask the government to actually subsidize part of that solar power which is delivered and not really make them finance it themselves?
No, there are already a couple of actually programs that are being implemented, saying that first thing is that we've actually fought against the capital subsidy, saying that not because from an end user point of view, we believe that the capital subsidy in fact goes towards bribing. If you have to take the subsidies out, it goes into bribing, parts of it, which again you are basically inculcating the cost of the concept of corruption in your own institution anyway, right? What we have said is, because we have a lot of faith in the local financial institutions, which are 40,000 banks in the rural areas, what we pushed for many years, and finally the solar mission in fact actually has that, which is happy that rather than capital subsidy, can you actually reduce the interest rates? Okay, rather than charging the poor 12%, can you charge them 5%? So that's what has actually come into the solar mission, which actually got implemented in November. It's going through its teething issues, but that is where the reallocation of that so-called interest subsidy. For us, interest subsidy is very important because not only people get light, they also forcing the people to become financially inclusive in the system, so they become citizens of a country rather than and actually go. That's where the subsidies are actually being allocated. Yes, but so the thing is that the rich. I'll tell you, I was talking to colleagues just outside. The maximum squeeze the profits we have is from the rich. Maximum number of non-payments are from the rich. And obviously we don't do any of the politicians because we never get the money. But the second is the so-called rich. They will haggle and haggle and haggle about the prices, that is. So when people talk about, oh, can you sell it to the rich at a higher cost and so you can subsidize the poor? That never happens. The poor pay so that the rich can actually get the subsidies. Anyhow, that's the different story, yes. But yes, the subsidies are actually, long-term is the finance subsidies.
Yeah,
Thanks for your wonderful talk. So, the hydro-based or coal-based power in India, as I know, it costs around 6 rupees, that is 15 cents per kilowatt. Whereas if you look for solar power, it's around 13 rupees, so that is 30 cents per kilowatt. And you are saying that with your technology it is cheaper than 13 rupees, and so because with that comparison, solar is definitely expensive. But could you explain a little bit more?
No, I didn't say it that way. I see the per unit cost of there are two. Let's not talk about the external cost. The cost of the poor. Many of the poor don't have electricity, so there's no question of comparing it to coal power or nuclear power. They spend on kerosene and candles, which is much higher than coal. It comes to more than 20-25 unit. But secondly, that we as a country need to realize also when everybody says that India needs to look at coal and nuclear, we do not talk of external cost and the social cost. Okay, when Coal India, when any software company, I'll give you two sets, software company goes public, many of the employees have stock options. When Coal India went public, their largest employer base, the coal miners, did not get a single share. Right? Who are the coal miners? Are the poor. So you and me are getting cheap electricity because the poor miner is subsidizing us. He gets daily wages. That cost is not built into it, right? Secondly, we are built up as an enterprise selling solar to the poor who are actually displacing kerosene. I pay 30% tax on my profits. Software industry in Bangalore does not pay tax. Right? Where is the level playing field? It's a question about we are pushing for that level playing field. It's the cost, the external cost of coal and nuclear. You look at the newspapers in the last 1 year, sir. You actually look at the number of people who have died because of protests. You'll never hear about people dying because protesting against solar. Right? But coal and nuclear, we're building the largest nuclear plant in Jaipur. How many people have died in the last 1 month alone? What is that? Is that the cost we are talking about, not putting into an Excel sheet of what the end per unit? So as a country, we need to look at very carefully and be an example for other developing countries. 100 kilometers from in Bangalore, for a radius of 20 kilometers, we are building 15 1,000 megawatt coal-fired plants. The cost of externalities is, we are today talking about 6 rupees a unit is just what we're not even looking at transmission and distribution, we're not looking at the human cost, the social cost, which is so unsustainable for the country in many ways.
I was just curious if you could highlight more on the kind of training stuff you guys do. There's another big piece that you kind of completely didn't address.
See, the training is on 2 levels. One is, not 3 levels. See, you look at entrepreneurs who would actually do village level. There are some people who take 5 to 6 villages, and some entrepreneurs who can actually take a Selco type and go into a couple of states. So we do actually training for all these 3 type of entrepreneurs or enterprises or existing enterprises who actually want to diversify into sustainable energy. We in fact do the complete training and saying that this is what we have. Don't take that in what. Now tell us what are the issues that are there in where you want to do actually business. Sit with them and saying that these are issues, please don't even touch till you have a management team, or don't even touch, this will not work in your locality. And then also work with him, for example, work with him to look at the right investors. Is there a good mix between equity, debt and grants for that? So we would work from end to end for that entrepreneur. So it depends on what training that we do.
One more question, last question.
Harish, you've alluded to VCs as a potential source of funding for social entrepreneurship, but how about foundations and charitable organizations? How do they look at sort of a for-profit model like yours?
You see, we are stuck between here the NGO world and the for-profit, hardcore for-profit world, right? the social entrepreneurship space, and if you look at very well-known social entrepreneurship organizations which fund social entrepreneurship, in fact actually don't fund for-profits, which is crazy. See, forget the health and the education sector, but in the other sectors, I think the biggest barrier to what's happening is grant making in those other sectors like energy. I think philanthropic foundation needs to move away from purely grant making and making an investment. Okay, make an investment long term, because no other VC is going to take a short term investment. And that's why, I mean, for us, it's been, as people say, we have an ideal situation where Lemelson, rather than giving us a grant, actually took a shareholding position. They wanted to do, for example, 1,000 houses. With an investment, with the same amount of money, they're actually getting 10,000 houses. Many of the grant-making institutions and multilaterals need to shift away from their purely grant-making December 31st, March 31st rules and say that how do we look at long-term investments? We need to invest in companies. I think that's where, because many of the VCs are not yet experienced in investing in the poor. They don't have the experience because they have not gone through the realities of what needs to be done, the ecosystem. I think it needs to come from both sides. VCs have to come in the middle and the philanthropic institutions need to come. And hopefully a lot of